Go ahead and get started. I think we'll have a few more folks join as we kick off here. Just want a few housekeeping notes before I give it over to Jeremy. This session is being recorded. It will be posted to the sessions and recordings link by tomorrow. So just know that this session is being recorded. We also have our AI bot on to capture any highlights and chats throughout the day. So if you see some closed captioning at the bottom of your screen, that's what that is. We do want to make sure that this session is as interactive as possible. So if you want to get used to the chat, feel free to post your first and last name and company in there. That way we can get the conversation going. You are muted upon entry just to minimize any background noise. But if you have a comment or a question throughout the presentation, don't hesitate to come off mute and we will make sure that we get that addressed. Okay, I think that covers most everything. Thanks again to everyone who's joined so far. I think we're going to have a great session on cybersecurity. Okay, Jeremy, over to you.
Hey, thanks a lot, Hannah. So yeah, just to reiterate, really looking forward to a great discussion with everybody today. Like Hannah mentioned, you'll see down at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen a chat feature. So if you're able to click on that, just go ahead and test that out. It should pop up the chat window over to the right. And like Hannah mentioned, if you can just drop your name in the chat box, maybe where you live and what company you're from, that would help just kind of get used to it. I think the other thing is one of my favorite new features of WebEx is they've incorporated the reactions and emojis. You should also see a little kind of like a face icon down at the bottom of the screen as well. So if you hear anything that you like, there's a clapping emoji, there's a celebration emoji and all kinds of stuff. So go ahead and check that out as well. So this is really meant to be a follow-on to the cybersecurity and data management reverse pitch from Tuesday morning. We had a really good panel discussion. I was really fortunate to be joined by Saida Humera from EPRI. We had Wes Jones from National Renewable Energy Labs, and we also had Giovanna Helms from Lawrence Livermore National Lab as well. So what we're going to do is I just want us to start off and talk a little bit about what we're trying to get out of this breakout session and the vision for this. So I actually had to go online and really think about what we wanted to do from a grand challenge perspective. And so like anybody, I started out Googling grand challenge and came up with a definition that I thought was really relevant to the discussion here. So really what we're trying to find is we're trying to identify issues that are difficult but important. And really they're things that are recognized by many different institutions or professions, really meaning to encourage solutions or advocate for the application of funds. So what we're trying to do with that in mind is identify the top either 2 to 3 or 1 to 3 challenges in the energy industry associated with cybersecurity and also data management that artificial intelligence could be a potential solution. So we talked a lot about this on Tuesday, but I think really what I'm hoping to get out of this is a call to action going forward. So what are those top 2 to 3 challenges? What can we do going forward? But then also, if there's anybody that's interested in collaborating going forward, also identify that also. So just a little bit of a recap, and we're going to probably I'll spend just a few minutes talking about some of the key highlights from the reverse pitch on Tuesday, and probably spend a little bit more time discussing these as well. So if there's any reaction to these, feel free to drop those in the chat box. I may call on some people just to get the discussion going as well. Really interested in everybody's point of view. So the first one that we talked about on Tuesday was the challenges associated with detection of sophisticated cybersecurity attacks. So we talked a lot about just those different challenges. The mature cybersecurity attacks that we typically, not typically, but that we're faced with in the energy industry can pose some really unique challenges. So the first thing that we talked about was just the challenge of detecting zero-day vulnerabilities. And so for those that aren't cybersecurity experts here, really what we're talking about with zero-day vulnerabilities is something that is previously unknown. So something that has been in the wild 0 days. And what that means is it can be more difficult for us to detect those types of vulnerabilities or malware because there's no known signature for that vulnerability or malware. The other thing that we talked about was really improving the detection of tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs. And one of the challenges that we've really seen from a cybersecurity perspective is you have the initial compromise, which may utilize malware. But a lot of times what happens is once the attacker gets in and establishes persistence within a network, they're really looking to gather information, looking to pivot down into from the information technology network or OT network, or into the OT network. And a lot of times what they do is they'll use TTPs that may not be malware based. So they might use credentials that they've stolen. They might go in and utilize existing communication channels to really change the operational characteristics of the industrial control system components, change set points, change logic, and things like that. And the challenge with that is a lot of times that appears to be, and I'll say this in kind of air quotes, is normal behavior. And that's really one of the things that also makes those types of attacks very difficult to detect. And one of the other highlights that we talked about was enhancing supply chain cybersecurity. So we talked a little bit, Giovanna talked about developing software bill of materials, some potentially promising research, looking at utilizing artificial intelligence to automatically generate software bill of materials. And really what a software bill of materials is it is a listing of all of the different pieces of software, different code dependencies, third-party software that's used on a device. And why that's really important is that can help us to identify later on down the road when a known vulnerability or when a vulnerability becomes known, identify that it affects that specific component so that we can take actions to either mitigate or install a patch. And then last but not least, we also talked about increasing alarm confidence, helping either reduce false positives or maybe enabling the use of automated response capabilities in orchestration. The next theme that we talked about was asset visibility, asset identification, and configuration management. And the reason we spent some time on this is it really can be the foundation to cybersecurity. It does go along with some of the supply chain things that we talked about, developing software bills of material, really just understanding what you have so that you can enable things like vulnerability and patch management. You can have a better recovery strategy. And really the key challenge there is to increase accuracy and granularity in the OT networks. We also talked about just the challenges that come from having a diverse network with maybe not everything interconnected, challenges with things like skid-mounted controllers that still, even though they're not connected through, say, for example, the distributed control system, they still have an important piece to play in operations, and they still can be susceptible to attacks. So understanding that those are part of your network, or I should say they're part of your control system strategy, and they're very important to operations, because they're isolated, they can be very difficult to identify and detect. The third theme that we talked about was just some of the challenges from a data management perspective. Saida, I see Saida is on. Do you mind talking just a little bit about, just as a recap, some of these challenges?
Sure. Sure. I hope you can hear me right here.
Perfect.
Sure. So we discussed a lot on the data privacy because it went very well with what we were talking about, the other themes, cybersecurity and other stuff. But we started with defining what data governance is in layman terms, like We said it was a framework of roles and responsibilities, of policies and procedures and other stuff. And then we also went ahead and spoke about, discussed that while data security and data privacy are very important to reduce the risk, but we also have to be conscious of the fact that it should not be at the cost of data availability and usability. We want data to be used and available for the stakeholders, but at the same time, we want it to be secure too. And we started with the lack of, very high level risk of a lack of data governance framework, like what happens if we don't have data governance in place. Definitely the first and foremost thing is your stakeholders will not have the trust in data, and then your reputation at stake, a lot of penalties and fines because of the regulations that we have out there. And there are so many other reasons of all of the risk if we don't have data governance. So we touched upon the risk that if we don't have data governance in place. And then we started off with listing some common challenges of getting to start your data governance program. So how understanding the value of the data is important. The communication, the training that needs to be done at the workplace, not only with your data analysts or with your subject matter experts, with the data people who are dealing with the data, but also with the management, with the senior leadership, because when we are talking about the data governance, we are talking about implementing a change. So implementing a change, as we all know, is not easy. So how the senior leadership plays an important role here. Their support and their engagement is really important. So that was one thing. And then there was another misconception that is out there, that data governance is a IT project. So first of all, data governance is not a project. It's not even a program. It's a process. And then it's not owned by IT, but it should be a business program, a business process that should be implemented, and it is a process which should be interwoven within the fabric of the organization, is what we discussed on, and also how establishing a data ownership model, a data stewardship model is very important in building that framework of data governance. And then also how a lack of metadata in a single source of truth is a big challenge that we have out there. So how we can, then we spoke about different opportunities on how we can establish that metadata by using some of the good tools out there, and having a data catalog and data quality, where AI can play a big role in some of these tools, and also how data is a backbone, and it helps AI. It supports AI with a data catalog, with a metadata, and a good data quality solution in place. So those were some of the things that we discussed, and then there were some questions on data privacy and data lineage that we went through. From the audience, there were some good questions on data privacy, so we addressed some of those questions too. That's all, Jeremy, for me.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Saeed. That was helpful. So I see we have just a comment from Anis in the chat box. You also mentioned data stewardship and roles at different units. Anis, are you able to speak to that a little bit more and maybe share your perspective about data stewardship and the different roles that you've seen?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I think that Saeed has mentioned about the data stewards, the role of the data stewards at different business unit levels, where they will be able to, maintain the database. So it's a responsibility of the business units where the data stewards come into the picture, and their role is also very critical in the data governance. I think that point was very critical from the governance point of view and from the maintenance point of view for the longer perspective.
Yeah, that's right, Anish. Thanks for reminding that. So at EPRI, what we did was, and this is common in most of the data governance framework, that we give the ownership to the business units. So at EPRI, we have different business units. So we identified the data stewards within the organization, because they know, each of the business units knows their data best. So they will be their best subject matter experts, and they will be the data stewards who can help us out. So, and then giving them the ownership would help build a robust framework. So yeah, that should be a best practice, that giving the ownership to the business unit as such. And also, like, we have a legal team here at EPRI too. So if you are heavy on the data privacy side, so it is recommended that you dedicate some of the legal stewards also to the business unit, so they can help guide them with their data lineage and other legal questions.
Yeah, thanks, Anis and Saida. Yeah, excellent. So I'm going to pause here before we move on. Are there any thoughts on these themes? Or are there some things that maybe we're missing, or maybe some of these resonate more than others for folks?
I think it's kind of you need the whole package. I mean, the data management doesn't work if you're not putting the cyber security in place to keep your data safe. Data management by itself doesn't do that. And if you're looking at utilities, understanding the threats on assets is a big issue as well. So I think you can't really separate one from the other, in my opinion.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. I think that's a great point. You know, we also have a lot of discussions around the data management side and the classification of information. I think there's some parallels there with just how we look at OT cybersecurity. So what I mean by that is, a lot of times we'll start and say, you know, what's the risk, right? So what's the potential impact of either that device being compromised or that data stolen, altered, lost, and really understanding what that consequence is. And so I think that's a really important point to consider from a data management perspective, is how you classify that information. But also, I think as we start to look at integrated use cases where we have data being sent from the OT environment to the IT environment, but then also vice versa, really understanding the loss or the impact if that information is lost, stolen, compromised, because ultimately what we're doing is we're building out capability, and there could be some potential impact to operations. I think that's a really important point to think about. But then certainly to your point, Leah, you know, having that data there, you know, that data can be sensitive sometimes. I do know that there's also, from a regulatory perspective, there's some considerations with how that data is protected as well. So there's some regulatory considerations in the US, but certainly some other legal considerations that Saida mentioned internationally as well.
And so I also think that, sorry.
Okay. Go ahead, sorry.
I'm on a roll. I think the data is the thing that is the thread through the whole carpet that we see here, is we are moving data through our systems, and that makes them vulnerable because we need that movement in our data. And so we can't isolate assets as well as we used to do. And I think that makes us more vulnerable to attacks of all sorts. So I think data will always be on the forefront of our cybersecurity concerns.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, good. We also have, I know we have, I saw that Esther Mullen joined from our power delivery and utilization group. Esther, would you be able to share some of your perspective on challenges that you've seen on that side?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep, perfect. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting that Leah just talked about security over data that we use for AI. So it really seems that the cybersecurity challenge is, is kind of twofold. On one hand, it's how do we use AI to secure systems? But on the other hand, is how do we secure AI itself? Because again, with really just the fact that it's data driven, it means that people just have to be a little bit more kind of transparent and generous with their data, and that opens it up to a lot of a lot of threats. So we kind of have to look at that as a side, and I believe that's where data management comes in. And then how do we secure this data? How do we govern it? How do we, what do permissions look like? And if a sophisticated AI algorithm is created, how do we evaluate how secure or how robust this algorithm is against cyber attacks? So that's kind of, I believe that's a very open problem with really AI algorithms. But then on the other hand, it's kind of interesting to see how AI can secure systems. Of course, and I think we can all see the trend with, with attacks that are currently emerging. These attacks are becoming increasingly more sophisticated. There's, this trend of malware being equipped with the capability to learn. So basically, the malware has learning capabilities, and so it's crucial to, again, to understand that the ordinary intrusion detection systems we have are no longer as effective against this emerging threat. So really just trying to find more sophisticated ways to detect attacks. And this, for me, I believe it really, an example of like a zero-day attack, an interesting thing that I studied during, when I was in grad school was, is it possible to simulate the impact of a control command to determine if there's an attack within that command? So things like that. Can AI help us rapidly even kind of forecast and see if something is going to impact our network? Is it going to be an attack, or is it just maybe an anomaly? Things like that. Can AI help us classify things like that to prioritize our resources? And so, yeah, when I look at these problems, they seem to cover, really just some of the critical parts of cybersecurity that, that if we really sort of focus on, again, the assets, the intrusion detection systems, and then just managing the data, that kind of covers like a huge chunk of many of the cybersecurity problems we're dealing with. So I think these are very good challenges. It's kind of interesting to see what the proposed solutions are going to look like. But I really believe that good, especially intrusion detection systems, should also lean so hard on their learning capabilities and learning rapidly, because that's how rapidly the attack surfaces are evolving. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. That's interesting. Thank you. And I know one thing, and Esther, if you don't mind me mentioning this as well. I know we've had some discussions before about the challenges associated with just analyzing the sheer amount of information in Security Operations Center as well. So whether it's information, whether it's specific alerts and alarms, I think that's probably an area that we can probably draw some parallels even from plant operations, because I know that can be a challenge as well. So do you mind maybe sharing some experience on that as well, Esther?
Yeah, so with many SIM tools that that are able to actually now process a huge amounts of data, there's the utilities, at least the ones that I've interacted with, they're kind of, they're overwhelmed with all the alarms that are coming through, and it's not possible to address all of these. And so, it's interesting to see if AI can help them really prioritize these alarms and accurately as well. Like we said, to mitigate false positives and things like that. And I was talking to one utility, and they had a very interesting problem that might be worth mentioning. And they said because of the sheer volume of alarms they have to deal with, they prioritize, and for sure, but they know that some of the alarms that they filter out, they might be, they might be leaving out actually issues that are critical to the network because they're having to again use the traditional methods of really just filtering what seems important and what isn't. And so an interesting problem would be if AI can help them identify something that they have considered as minor, and yet it's actually really detrimental to the network. A simple example is along the lines of, login attempts. Everybody knows usually after 3 login attempts, somebody gets locked out, but a sophisticated actor malicious attacker will only try, to log into a system twice. Any IDS is going to ignore that, right? So how can we tell that this is actually a malicious actor who's trying to stay under the radar, and yet he's actually trying to elevate his privileges? And so these are some of the interesting problems that I have encountered. Again, really just trying to see if AI can help us, provide more granularity in how we analyze alarms and how we sort of respond to these faults. So we've kind of encountered some interesting problems.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, and I think you brought up a couple of really good points, especially setting that threshold at a level to where you can have the level of detection that you're looking for, but also having, finding that sweet spot between that and not having a situation where you're constantly flooding the security operations center with alerts and alarms as well, so that they can respond to those alarms and alerts and run them down to figure out what the true cause was. So I think that's probably an area too to maybe think about is, and I'll pose that to the group. Feel free to either take yourself off mute and respond or drop a comment in the chat box. But, is there a potential to help use artificial intelligence to help with the tuning process for, say, example, normalizing a SIM or a security information event management platform that has some of the capabilities like Esther mentioned? I think that's an area that could be pretty promising as well, because from my experience, what I've seen is that takes a lot of effort to help set up the alerts and constantly tune the SIM, especially initially. And I think what it can do is, well, the other part of that is that not just the level of effort, but just the expertise that it takes as well. So what that can really lead to is people will kind of install it with a quasi out-of-the-box type of configuration, and it really the system hasn't been configured, the SIM hasn't been configured maybe the way that it should have been as well. So that could be another potential use to help aid in the detection capability at different utilities. So I see, Anis, there's just a comment. I think this is a good comment in the chat box. So would a blockchain-based framework help in combination with AI models for traceability? Anis, do you mind expanding on that just a little bit? Share some thoughts.
Yeah, sure. See, as mentioned by Johanna, I think on the second day, he mentioned that there are software AI models which are capable of monitoring the software libraries which are maybe vulnerable to the attack. and the configurational data which is being changed. But it is very difficult to get where it has been originated from. So it is very difficult to trace the attack. So if there is if we can implement a blockchain framework, and if we can, in combination with the AI models, then there would be a possibility to trace the whole, if we go backward and try to find out where exactly is the point where the attack has been initiated, so that certain actions could be taken. So is there a possibility, or is there anyone who worked on such a use case for implementing more secured environment on OT?
Yeah, that's a really good comment. I think you hit on one thing that I think is extremely interesting, is just identifying, when the attack occurred. So what I've seen a lot of times is some challenges to recover from an event. Initially, it does take a little bit of time to understand, first of all, when the attack occurred, when the initial compromise occurred. And, we see the dwell time, which is the time between when, the initial compromise occurs and when you detect it. It is shrinking. I think overall, I've seen some trends where that continues to shrink, but it's still on the order typically of months, right? Sometimes. And as we've seen with some of these sophisticated attacks, it can be even longer. It can be a year. So that means that, the attackers are in the network for up to a year, sometimes even more, before we actually detect that something's going on. So when you look at it then from a recovery perspective, you have all these incremental backups, and you have all of your backups that you've been taking that entire time. And, I think it can be a kind of an error trap for people to have a false sense of security by having those backups, because, it's not a good thing to recover malware. So you don't want to reinstall the malware. That's never a good thing. So that's one of the challenges, I think, as well. And I think that's a really interesting potential application in these, is maybe utilizing blockchain to monitor communications, and to help to try to detect maybe when some of these different configuration states or even communications have occurred utilizing a blockchain. I've also been working on a project jointly with the National Energy Technology Lab, National Renewable Energy Lab, Sandia, and several others, to build out a blockchain test bed. And one of the things that we've done with that project is we've come up with kind of a classification of use cases. So in fact, we're getting ready to publish a journal article in the next month or so to talk about those different types of use cases for blockchain technology. And one of those was communications, so tracking communications. And I think that's a really good perspective it needs to put on it. I hadn't personally thought of, looking at it from that perspective to help determine historically when an attack could have occurred. Great point.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks a lot.
Yep. Yeah, and feel free later on if you want. I'd love to follow up with you on this too. So if this is something that you're interested in, I'd be happy to follow up with you on that project.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, good. So I had some thoughts, and I really want to pose some questions to the group. So we had some good discussion and dialogue around these different themes. And so really what I just wanted to throw out there are some questions for the team, and really is, do you feel that any of these challenges are already addressed? So essentially what we're saying is, are these maybe challenges, maybe there's some solutions that we're not aware of, or maybe there's some different sectors outside of energy that have solved these solutions some other way that we haven't seen. Any thoughts on that?
I have a brief, maybe comment. So I've seen some solutions, especially around zero-day attacks, that don't really, they don't include AI in how they address the problem. And because I believe because they didn't, there was some shortcomings in their solutions. Their solutions had limitations. But this is mostly in the academic space, right? An example is we were looking at again, I worked in collaboration with some university, and we were looking at how to detect attacks that we don't know, that we've never seen before, but if these are against the control commands, and if they're executed, they're going to have a detrimental impact on the system. And what the idea was, we were specifically looking at the transmission network, and we were looking at power flow values within the transmission lines. And the way we addressed this was to design an algorithm that would rapidly simulate the impact of a control command against a transmission network, and then determine if this command is safe, and if it was safe, the command would then run, and if it wasn't, then it could be blocked. And so the simulation had to be so rapid that it worked really well for smaller networks. But as we started looking at maybe control systems that are controlling really larger geographical areas, then this wasn't as effective. So incorporating AI in something like that would, if at all it's possible, to run a faster simulation with AI, or even kind of in a distributed way that doesn't, in a distributed way that makes it execute faster, would be kind of an interesting new solution space to look at. So my point is, for some of these, there's solutions, but they don't really include AI, and AI could come in and address some of the limitations that the existing solutions have.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, definitely. Okay. So I'm curious, from everybody's perspective, are there challenges that you're working on now, or maybe some potential obstacles now? And really, what I'm kind of interested in is to do a little bit of a compare and contrast. I think from what I've seen, these are some challenges that I've seen in the field, and I know, Saida, from your experience on the data management side as well, these seem to be, you hit on some of the key challenges today. But I guess I'm really curious of people's thoughts about, as we see, new technologies come about, new approaches for energy supply and distribution, things like that, new changes in technologies with the way that we architect our control systems. What are some thoughts on some challenges that might be coming down the road as well in the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
Hey, Jeremy. Saida here. So right now, we definitely have at EPRI some state-of-the-art technology that we have been using, and there are lots and lots of tools out there. For sure, I can speak from a data management and a governance perspective, but for sure, when we are looking at data privacy, we also have a lot of questions around cybersecurity and other stuff. So there are different levels of security that we provide, and starting with the data classification that we have out there. And depending on what kind of data you have, whether it is public or internal, or if it is confidential and restricted, how do you deal with that data versus if it is public and internal. So we have some solutions in place at EPRI for sure. And as we all know, like the restricted and confidential data being in the highly secure locations, and other stuff will also it's kind of has an impact on the cost too. So right now, so from cybersecurity, yeah, we have some good databases and all in place, and also there is always a question of if you have your data on cloud, How are you ensuring that it is secure? So I leave that up to the cybersecurity experts here to talk about from their perspective. But I think from a data privacy, from a data governance perspective, we definitely have a lot of good tools out there. And when we talk about the data provenance, the data lineage, that is the best solution I can look at in implementing the data privacy from a data management perspective. And we have tools, a lot of tools to to take care of data privacy. Just at EPRI, we use a lot of the Informatica suite, right from having a data governance tool, then data catalog is another tool that we have to collect all the data catalog, and then metadata management. And then there is also a highly sophisticated tool for data privacy management. So I think as we come across these issues, there definitely will be a rise in a lot of different sophisticated tools out there, especially with the GDPR at the tip of all of this. And then there are definitely other privacy laws that we have out there. So for sure, I think in 5 to 10 years, we definitely are looking at a more highly sophisticated tools. I can say that we currently are equipped also with some of them. And at EPRI also we have both from a data management perspective as also from a cybersecurity perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I think you hit on one thing, Saida, that I know we've really been thinking a lot about is some of the implications about the shift to the cloud as well. And I know from the energy industry perspective, there's a lot of focus on that. Just to share some thoughts, I know that, I typically, my focus is on the industrial control system, operational technology side for generation facilities, whether that be renewable or fossil generation. And a lot of times, those control system architectures and components utilize maybe older vintage technologies. And so a lot of times people will think that there's a level of isolation there. So, people will continue to run Windows 7. It's not out of the question to see Windows XP out in the field still as well, even though it's not officially supported by Windows as well. So if you kind of think of that progression, if you think of how the different life cycles of the different assets and architectures and technologies kind of stack to where you end up with a very customized solution where you might have newer operating systems, older operating systems mixed throughout your fleet, but sometimes even at a specific facility, that can always be a challenge. And so, we think, circling back to the cloud perspective, we think like, hey, we'll just continue to run local machines as long as we possibly can. We're going to hold out. But what we've seen, especially as the IT and OT networks become more integrated, is that a lot of the IT infrastructure is starting to shift to the cloud. And so by doing so, you almost force some of the OT functions that rely on the IT infrastructure to start to have to consider that. So from my perspective, I think we'll start to see, and we're already starting to see, some early use cases. I think one that I typically see where OT networks do rely on the IT infrastructure is remote access. And so, whether it's the credential management, identity and access management portion that leverages the IT infrastructure, or even just leveraging the networking infrastructure through the demilitarized zone and the IT network, that's one example where, like it or not, we do have to deal with some of the cloud, the shift to the cloud, and some other things as well. So I think that's a good maybe point to consider as we look forward is, how we could potentially use artificial intelligence to help first understand those IT/OT shared functions, and also understand and better protect and potentially detect compromises in the cloud that could affect the OT networks.
Hey, Jeremy, this is
Okay.
Todd LeClaire here from C3 AI, and just want to comment. I love the conversation during this breakout session. Lots of really good topics, and if you don't mind, I'd love to share my perspective on some of these topics here.
Yeah, Todd, absolutely.
Awesome, awesome. So, lot of really great stuff. Just going back to, when Leah said about integrating tools and cybersecurity, data management, metadata management, completely agree with that mindset. And someone was just talking, and sorry, I didn't catch the name, about all the different tools even EPRI is using, from Informatica to whatnot, and managing and stitching those together can be pretty complex. So when you're looking at some of the utilities that we work with, and kind of talking, not to talk for them, but just talking about our experience with them, is they understand the headaches and how challenging that can be, especially when you're looking at it from an enterprise level. And sometimes enterprise level is helpful because you kind of have that center governing body that's able to manage that data, manage that access, but even still, using multiple tools can get pretty cumbersome, especially as you start to go past, a couple of use cases that you're addressing using big data, AI, ML. So that's just one comment about consideration of the tool sets that an individual utility might be using. And then just to comment quickly on the cloud transition, and completely agree, we're seeing that as well. We're seeing some of our partners and customers push data to the cloud that was never there before. But then there's always the IT/OT consideration, and can some of those more OT focused use cases be pushed to the cloud, right? I mean, it's going to depend on a number of things: security, data availability, communication, latency, and bandwidth. If you're using AI to potentially influence an operational decision, and you need that algorithm to respond in milliseconds or seconds, or even sometimes minutes, with some of the communication networks that utilities have out there, that can be a problem. So, and just not to sell, not to push our solution, but we have been working with some utilities to offer hybrid models, knowing that the demands of any application may not be, may not fit in the cloud infrastructure of the future. It may require both. A great example that's non-utility, but oil and gas focus, is Shell Energy. We've been working with HP and Intel and VMware to actually put AI models on remote oil rigs that don't necessarily have connectivity. So what they're able to do is kind of design and manage and train those AI algorithms in a cloud environment, but then port them over to an on-premise or local solution where connectivity is not available or speed is required. So while I agree the transition to the cloud is happening, if you're thinking about solutions, if you're thinking about use cases that you don't have cloud access to, I would just suggest, don't let that be your inhibitor, because there are technologies and tools out there that enable multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, and kind of different deployment options. So I'll stop there. I hope that input was helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Todd. Yeah, I think that's insightful. And I mean, one of the things that was kind of, for me, a little bit of a wake-up call is, just kind of going back to the mindset that I typically see in the energy industry, especially in the OT plants and some of the older vintage plants, is that, hey, we won't have this shift to the cloud. And, everybody kind of thinks it's maybe 5 or 10 years out. A couple of years ago, I was meeting with one of the major control system vendors, and they told me that they're already deploying, like you mentioned, kind of the hybrid solution and cloud-based solutions internationally, particularly in water systems. So it is happening in other OT environments. And so, as we continue to see that trend, I think it'll definitely start to impact the energy OT environments quicker than we may expect.
Completely agree.
Okay. This last question I had for everybody is more going back to the data management side. I know Saida has talked about a lot of really good concepts, really good challenges that she's seen. But I'm curious for everybody, especially if there's anybody that either works with utilities, either is a utility or works with them quite a bit. Do you see that everybody typically has a data management plan? And then what are some of the challenges, some other challenges that people might be seeing from a data management perspective?
Hello, this is Rolando Vega with CPS Energy. I think I can share some perspectives from our point of view. Can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks, Rolando.
Sure. So, there is so much that we can be talking about in even in this category alone. Let me see, how I target maybe the subject of metadata, access controls and security policies, at least to get started. So from our perspective, to start, we have mini data management plans, meaning that whomever is administrator of certain applications, they have what they believe is a data management plan for the information contained in their application. And that is good, but clearly not acceptable in the day and age where we live. And the challenge comes when we're dealing with the disconnectedness of those plans, and that currently we don't really have an enterprise data management. And what we're aiming to work this coming year, which is something that has been prioritized, by the way, at the very top of the organization, and is now being communicated at all levels of the organization, the need for a data governance framework, which is an enterprise data governance framework. So we're putting in a lot more energy this year to defining that framework, which kind of defines the policies and the principles, the rules of the game, by which all of the components or applications across the enterprise need to abide by. And so that component is very important. The aspect of this connectedness, we have metadata, we have hundreds of applications across the enterprise in the data center, and also, and that's just, focusing on data center is a couple hundred applications. When you consider the applications in the workstations or laptops, that adds several hundred more applications, and every one of those clearly have their own, definitions of policies that can be controlled, and the metadata that is being collected or not collected. And so there is certainly a lot of chaos right now in terms of how do you have the visibility to that metadata. And I heard one of the members here on this call talking about, how tools today exist, like Informatica and Axon and things like that. We're not there yet. That's a future where we want to get to, where we have better visibility across the entire enterprise metadata, to track these more closely, and then put some AI on top of that information. And I know that some of the vendors are beginning to offer some of their own flavors of AI and ML to leverage this metadata. I think that there is a great potential in this area. It's a data set or a set, multiple sets of data sets that are readily available, at least in our utility, and I'm sure in most utilities. Most applications have their own internal logging and or metadata generation, but only DBAs know about the existence of those, and most times, administrators don't necessarily leverage the metadata repositories, let alone the integration of metadata across the enterprise, which could be a very promising area for not only data management and better data management, but also from a security point of view. I'm sure that there are very significant nuggets there to be untapped. On the area of access controls, which is the second point, we have an identity management system to control users and the assignment of roles or active directory roles, which are then used by the applications to govern policies for those applications. But I also see that there has been a pattern of not defining roles with a consistent nomenclature, for example, and I see that there needs to be a time in the next many years, maybe in the next 5 years or so, where we get our role definition much more standardized, so that people can search and apply and request for the proper roles, or that even as employees are moved from one department to another, the next manager actually knows what are the roles that they're having to review for their new employee, because tracking those active directory roles is not always very intuitive. So that needs to be strengthened, in my view, especially when we live in where people say, yes, role-based access, and that's great if you have role-based access, but what if you don't know what the roles are, or the definition or the standard of those roles are not well defined? So that's certainly a challenge for us. So some applications have thousands of roles defined, and it gets so granular that people lose track of what is out there, which is a data management problem of its own at the access level. And then the last piece is on the security policies, which is a component of data management that has to be addressed, because every application has its own kind of flavors of what can or cannot be controlled. And and I don't know that we have that documented across the enterprise well enough. And again, administrators will know what the options are, but I don't know that we have architected this very intentionally. And it's certainly an area of opportunity, especially as we combine it with access controls. But that's my 2 cents on this subject.
Yeah, Rolando, thank you. That's excellent feedback. And I think it aligns with a lot of the work that we're doing and our vision going forward as well. So I think we might be able to, Saida, we may have some references that we might be able to share potentially going forward if you're interested, Rolando, maybe some potential collaboration in the future going forward. Is that something that you're interested in?
Absolutely, I'm interested.
Okay. Okay.
Sure,
Yeah,
I think, what Rolando had just mentioned, we have been through that, and the same point as metadata, in the solution that we are putting together, how we define the roles and other stuff. I think there is a lot I think we can share, because it's the same pain point that we also are working on. We were able to make some progress, building some data stewardship model and all. So I think, Rolando, we should connect offline so that we can share our experiences.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Looking forward to it.
Sure.
Okay, well, thanks everybody. I know we're a minute over time, but I think we had some great discussion. So thanks everybody. I really appreciate everybody's openness and participation today. I've taken about a page or 2 of notes here. One of the things that I want to do is I'm going to kind of go back and summarize this. We had a couple folks interested in some follow-up as well, so I think we're going to be able to, we'll get your contact and email information from the registration. So if we've got some follow-up, I think it was a very productive conversation, and I really appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. All right, so we will be back on the other site at noon Eastern for our final fireside chat. Again, the session was recorded, so we'll save the recording and we can reference it back. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you at noon Eastern.